plugged in at 1:30 in the morning, September 14th, 2006. Denver TRACON, Sector 5 East Approach. The midnight push was dying. Last of the FedEx heavies coming down the Flatty arrival, a couple of UPS repositioners, and a NetJet citation out of Centennial that was running 40 minutes late because his passengers couldn't find their luggage. That kind of night. The scope was clean. Maybe 10 targets, spread out like stars on a clear night, each one tagged and behaving. ATIS was Information Hotel. Winds calm, visibility 10, altimeter 3012. There was a note about smoke haze from the fires west of the divide, the kind that hangs at 8,000 and turns the sunset orange but doesn't do much to viz. At 2 in the morning you couldn't see it anyway. You could smell it though, faint. Carried in through the HVAC like a memory of a campfire you didn't attend. Denver TRACON sat in the old building on the west side of the airport. Carpet that smelled like industrial cleaner. Chairs from 1998 that the FAA kept saying they'd replace. The stars display was new. We'd transitioned off the old Arts 3A the year before, and the scope was bright and sharp, and I still didn't like it. 23 years behind a radar scope, and I trusted the old green phosphor more than I trusted the new color display. But that's a different complaint. I worked the scope, routine. NetJet 472 Denver approach, descend and maintain 8,000. Expect visual approach runway 35 right. Down to 8,000, expect the visual 35 right NetJet 472. Clean readback, good pilot. UPS 1644 heavy Denver approach, descend via the Flatty arrival, altimeter 3012. Descend via Flatty 3012 UPS 1644 heavy. The strip printer was quiet. It only chattered when the TRACON computer generated a new arrival strip, and at this hour the arrivals were spaced 20 miles apart. I could hear the tick of the radar sweep, not really a tick, more of a soft pulse in the display refresh. The kind of rhythm you stop noticing after your first year, and then one night at 2 a.m. it's the only sound in the room and you notice it again. I should say something. About the airspace. Sector 5 covers the east approach into Denver International, everything from the surface to 12,000, roughly 12 miles east of the field to about 30 miles out. It's suburbia down there. Aurora, Buckley Air Force Base, which was still Buckley ANG Base back then. And Lowry. I started my career at Lowry, Air Force Controller 1981 to 1989. Lowry Air Force Base had a tower, a GCA unit, and 2 runways, 811 and 29 left, 29 right. T-38s and T-37s mostly. Training base. I worked that tower for 8 years before the base went into BRAC and they shut us down. I crossed over to FAA, got picked up at Denver TRACON because they needed bodies, and spent the next 23 years working the same airspace from a different chair. The runways were gone. The tower was demolished. They built houses where the taxiways used to be. There's a park where Hangar 4 stood, but the airspace was still mine. I don't tell people that at work. New controllers don't want to hear about a base that closed before they were born. But Sector 5, the east side, I knew every square mile of it from 5,000 feet because I'd been watching T-38s fly patterns over it since Reagan was president. That's context. You'll need it. At 0214 local, a target appeared, 1200 squawk, no mode C for a second, then it popped. 4,500 feet MSL, 11 miles east of the field. No flight plan, no call sign in the data block, just a VFR code in Class B airspace at 2 in the morning. I keyed up. Aircraft squawking 1,200, 11 miles east of Denver International at 4,500 Denver approach. Say call sign and intentions. Nothing. I tried again. Standard. Professional. Aircraft squawking 1,200, 11 east of DEN. If you read Denver approach, squawk ident. No ident, no response. The target just sat there at 4,500, painting every sweep solid as any aircraft on the scope. I checked the position, pulled up the map overlay. The target was sitting directly over. I stopped. I checked again. It was painting from the geographic coordinates of runway 29 left, Lowry Air Force Base, a runway that had been demolished 10 years ago. I stared for 3 seconds. That's a full radar sweep. You don't stare at things for 3 seconds on a live scope. Procedure. Follow procedure. Unknown VFR in Class B, no radio contact. I tagged the target, started a track, and picked up the landline to Buckley Approach. Maybe they had a late departure, someone forgot to file. Buckley said negative, nothing since 2200. I put the phone down. The target had moved, climbing 4,800, 5,000, 5,500, 5,800, 5,800 feet MSL, and it leveled off. I need you to understand what that number means. Lowry Air Force Base, traffic pattern altitude, was 5,800 feet MSL, 1,000 feet above field elevation. Every T-38 and T-37 that flew the pattern at Lowry crossed the numbers at 4,800, climbed crosswind to 5,800, and flew the downwind at 5,800. I called that altitude 1,000 times from the tower cab. Traffic pattern altitude 5,800, wind 290 at 5, cleared for the option, runway 29er left. And now something was climbing to that altitude, over the same ground. In the middle of the night, the target turned. Crosswind, heading north, perpendicular to the old runway heading. Then it turned again, downwind, heading 090, paralleling the reciprocal of runway 29 left, at 5,800, at 160 knots. 160 knots is pattern speed for a T-38 Talon. I tried the frequency again. Aircraft in the pattern, 11 east of DN, squawking 1,200 at 5,800. Denver approach on 125.6, say, call sign. Static. I tried guard. Any aircraft 11 miles east of Denver International flying a traffic pattern at 5,800, guard frequency, Denver approach. Nothing. Then I did something I haven't told anyone. I turned to the backup radio panel and dialed 126.2. Lowry Tower. The frequency hadn't been assigned since '94. Dead spectrum. I keyed up. Lowry Tower frequency, Denver approach, radio check. Nothing. Of course nothing. But my hands were cold. The kind of cold that starts at the fingertips and works inward, and it has nothing to do with the HVAC. Hey, Rick Delgado, the handoff controller. He was leaning back looking at my scope. What have you got at 11 East? VFR target, no contact. Buckley says it's not theirs. Rick rolled his chair over, watched the target for 2 sweeps. It was turning base, descending through 5,400. Then it rolled out on final, heading 290, lined up with a runway that was now a soccer field. That's a pattern, Rick said. That's a traffic pattern. I know. For what runway? There's nothing out there. I didn't answer. The target crossed the threshold coordinates at 4,900 feet, then climbed away. Back to 5,800. Another circuit. Same headings, same altitudes, same speed. Touch and go if there'd been anything to touch. FedEx called. Denver approach, FedEx 1260 on the Flotty arrival. We've got traffic, our 10 o'clock low. Looks like he's in a traffic pattern. Rotating beacon, steady nav lights, landing light just came on downwind, over that residential area southeast of the field. They could see it, not just a radar return, lights, a rotating beacon, over a neighborhood, for a runway that wasn't there. FedEx 1260, roger, we're working it. Maintain present heading, descend and maintain 9,000, expect vectors. I turned the FedEx away, got them pointed at the other side of the field. I didn't want them anywhere near the pattern. The target started its 3rd circuit, same geometry, same altitudes. like a recording played back on the scope. I pulled up the map overlay one more time and laid it against my memory of the Lowry aerodrome chart. The crosswind turn was exactly where it should be. The downwind leg was offset 1,200 feet from the runway centerline, standard for a military pattern. The base turn was at the right point. The final approach course was 290 magnetic. It was perfect, and I recognized it. Not just the geometry, the style, the way the turns were crisp but not aggressive. The way the downwind was maybe a half-mile long, a little short, the way a student would fly it when they were trying to stay tight. I knew that pattern. I'd watched it 100 times from the tower cab at Lowry. I knew whose pattern that was. Third circuit. The target rolled out on final, heading 290, lined up on the ghost of runway 29 left. Then the squawk changed. 7600. Lost comm, and it hit me like a freight train because that was the code. September 14th, 1988. Second Lieutenant David Harwell, T-38A, call sign Bolt 26. Third supervised night sortie, third touch and go. He'd called on final, hydraulic pressure dropping, and then his radio cut out and the squawk went 7600. I was in the tower that night. I said, Bolt 26, Lowry Tower. If you read, squawk ident. He didn't ident. He just kept coming. The target on my TRACON scope was doing the same thing, slowing, 140 knots, gear down speed, on a 2-mile final for a runway that was someone's house. I stood up. Nobody stands up on position, but I was standing, keying guard frequency. Aircraft squawking 7600, 11 east of Denver International. If you hear Denver approach, ident. If you hear Lowry Tower, ident. Rick was staring at me. The squawk changed again. 7700, emergency. The target went from lost comm to emergency in one sweep, and I knew what came next because I'd seen it. Harwell tried a go-around in 88, full military power. But the hydraulics were gone. The T-38 with no hydraulic pressure is a glider with the aerodynamics of a brick. 300 feet AGL, the airspeed bled off. Stall, impact on the threshold. I watched it from the tower cab. I was 26. First time I'd seen someone die on my frequency. Now I was watching the scope. Descending, 5,200, 5170, 5150. The rate was wrong, too fast, like something that tried to climb and couldn't. 5135, 5130, 5,130 feet MSL. Lowry Air Force Base, field elevation. The data block vanished, not a coast, not a fade. When a target drops radar contact, the system coasts it, shows the last known position with a CST tag for 12 sweeps. This didn't coast. The data block was there, and then it was not there. Like the scope had never seen it, like I had never seen it. I sat down. Rick was staring at me. The scope was clean. I called the supervisor. Keith Martinson came out with a coffee, and that look supervisors get when they think you're about to generate paperwork. I told him about the unknown target. He pulled the replay. It was all there. Primary and secondary returns, squawk codes, timestamps, 3 complete patterns at 5800. The squawk changes, the descent to 5130, then nothing. Probably a transponder anomaly, Keith said. I'll file it as unknown. The report said, unknown VFR target, Class B airspace, no radio contact, no traffic conflict, possible transponder anomaly. 6 sentences. Here's what it didn't say. The target flew a T-38 pattern at T-38 speed at Lowry's pattern altitude on September 14th. The squawk sequence, 1200 to 7600 to 7700, was identical to Harwell's last flight. 5130 was Lowry's field elevation. And 2 FedEx pilots at 9,000 feet saw lights, rotating beacon, nav lights, landing light, in a pattern over houses. What it definitely didn't say, I was the tower controller who cleared David Harwell for the option on 29 left at 0217 local on September 14th, 88. I watched his data block descend to field elevation. I watched it disappear. I sat in the tower cab for 2 hours until they sent me home. 18 years later, to the day, same time of night, I watched it happen again. Same pattern, same codes, same ending. I drove home on Tower Road, right through where Lowry used to be. Houses, a park, the soccer field where the threshold was. I pulled over and sat there with the engine running. My hands were shaking, fine tremor, like the muscles remembered something the brain was trying to forget. I looked at the soccer field, flat, green, goalposts. A place where kids play on Saturdays. I could still see the centerline stripe in my head, right down the middle of it. I put the car in drive, never worked a midnight shift again. Retired 8 months later. I still drive past there. I take Tower Road on purpose. I don't know why. Maybe to make sure the houses are still there. Maybe to make sure the runway isn't. The frequency, 126.2. Lowry Tower. I looked it up last year. Still unassigned. Dead air. Nobody transmitting. Nobody listening. At least